we'll move on. We'll try to see if we can go through the CSS slides. Last time around, I think it took all three HTML CSS classes, so we'll see how we manage. Anyway, CSS is awesome, right? It's a really good language. Some of you probably know that it's sometimes it's a pain in your butt. Like it's really hard to get it to do exactly what you want. So we'll try to learn it in a way so that it will give you as few problems as possible. You know the syntax. We have the selector, we have the curly braces, which contain the declaration, then we have the property and the value, right? Yeah, there are different ways of writing CSS. You can do it in line, which means that you write it within your HTML, right? Directly on the, for example, paragraph or H1 or whatever. Then there is the internal CSS, which means that you include it in line in your HTML file, but not on the HTML element. So you have it, for example, within the head. And then there is the last method, which is, I think, the most common, is the external CSS, where you import CSS files into your HTML. Do you guys know what is like good practice, bad practice?
Does anyone use inline anymore?
Well, I just used it a lot today because I'm working on emails. I don't know if you guys tried styling emails. It's a nightmare. Most email clients don't support anything modern. So sometimes you need to do inline, but mostly when you're doing website stuff, you will use external CSS. Yeah.
So some occasions.
Some occasions, some few good occasions, but normally it's not advised.
And internal is gone.
Yeah, well, internal is it's again, sometimes you need to. It's good, you know, that it exists, but you will probably use external.
Yeah.
Okay.
I heard on a meetup that sometimes they use internal for performance reasons.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's like the same reason they put the JavaScript. You know, it's for the user experience.
Yeah.
You know, you put the JavaScript at the end, so you deliver the HTML first, so the person gets engaged on especially on mobiles.
Yeah. So sometimes you will generate some CSS that will appear internally when you load the website, but you will still normally write it externally. So you will have some compile tools that will put it in there, but it's not there when you're developing, because it's difficult to like get an overview of stuff if it's not structured well when you have a big project. But if you, for example, if we look at the website that I'm working on right now, Gulokraris, we also generate the CSS so that it appears in line. So if I, there's a bunch of things here, but you see all of this, that's CSS, and that's not something we wrote, it's something that's generated. Yeah, but you can also do like your critical CSS internally first in the page, so that your page will be loaded with it, and then everything else as an external sheet. Okay, let's try to move on. Right. Yeah, so this is basically explaining how the browser understands CSS. It will go through your HTML and find a link to your CSS, and then it will get to this CSS style sheet. It's pretty basic. Then then this is a list of the different CSS selectors that exist. There's the tag selector, right? The first one, where you just select the HTML element. Then there is the ID selector, which is a hash. So it's the ID attribute in HTML, where you select it with the hash in CSS. I don't know. Have you used that before? Have you seen that before? The ID? Yeah. It's normally not really advised to use IDs anymore. It used to be pretty common, but because they need to be unique, so you're not allowed to use the same ID on one specific web page multiple times. It is difficult to write CSS that is reusable. So, for example, like in a component approach where you have I don't know, some small components that are reusable, it will be difficult to do it if you need to use selectors that are unique all the time. So that's why people went over to use class selectors, which don't need to be unique, and you are also allowed to have multiple classes on one HTML element, right? So your paragraph can both be called a text and a primary text if you want to. So that's really smart. That's probably something that you're going to be using mostly. Then you can also be a bit more specific by doing a tag with a class selector. So you select your paragraph with its class and its element. That's not something you normally do because it's over specific. You will always try to, or you should always try to be over specific when you're writing CSS, because if you are too specific, then you are going to mess yourself up. You will have difficulty overriding some styles that you have. So if you have some more generic styles, and then you have more local specific styles, then if your generic style is too specific, then you will have trouble overriding it at the local level. I don't know if it's I know it's a bit abstract, but it's something that you will experience where you work on bigger projects. So just remember, try to be as little specific as possible when you're writing CSS. And what does it mean to be as not specific? Do you know the answer to that?
It's a general, like general rules that can be applied to several parts of the page.
Yeah.
Be normal, be yourself.
What I mean when I say don't be specific or be as little specific as possible, I mean is use one class selector, or two if you really need to. So for example, if we go back to our CSS example from before, don't do that, right? Don't use both A and logo. Just use logo. And if you really need to, then you can do stuff like, for example, if you have. Okay, that's a bad example. Let's take the navigation link instead. So let's say we have one that is more important than the other ones. Then you would select your navigation links with this class, and then if you need to override that, then you would do this, right? You would select multiple, and then you say the color of this one needs to be blue, and then you see that about has become blue now, and that's because doing two classes is more specific than selecting with a single class, all right? And then if I had the third one, so if I had three classes next to each other, then it would be even more specific. But if I wrote a.navlink before, and I think now they are equally specific. Oh, they're not. Okay. Oh, that's good to know. But yeah, so sometimes if you do this and then you are trying to override something, let's say that you are only styling the class primary. If you selected the nav link with the anchor, then now it's more specific than the primary, and even though primary comes after nav link, it will not become blue because this is more specific.
Yeah.
So then if you just wrote nav link, then because of the order, the primary nav link will become blue. So I don't know, it is a bit abstract, and it is more easy when you have a big project like creating your CV to give examples, but just try to be as little specific as you can, generally speaking, when you write your CSS. Okay. Is it? No. Just that, okay. Right, so then we have grouping selectors, which just means that you can target multiple selectors by using a comma. So if you have some styles that should be the same for all of your headings, then you can do it with h1, h2, blah blah. That's a good one to know. Then the Descendant Selector. Do you know what the difference between a Descendant Selector and the Child Selector is? So what is the difference between div p and div arrow p? Should we try to look at it? So let's say we have a div, and then in there we have not a p, not a div. Let's say we have a anchor in here, and then in the anchor we have a paragraph, and then we also have a paragraph here. So we have one paragraph there and another over there. So we have a div where we have a paragraph, and then after it we have an anchor which contains a paragraph, right? So if I write div p and I want these divs to have a background of red, for example, then it's going to select both. Why is that?
Because
we
it's all
have
in the div.
We have a two
Yeah.
paragraph
Yeah.
in the div.
So we say
Is the
any
Descendant-
paragraph, right?
The Descendants.
Yeah, any paragraph that is within the div. Doesn't matter how deep it is inside the div. But if we use it with the arrow, and we say that, for example, this one should have a padding of 20 pixel, then you see that it's only the first one. And why is that? What does the arrow change?
The child.
Yeah, it's the direct child, the direct descendant. So it's not selecting the second paragraph because that is within something else.
Like grand.
Yeah, exactly. It's not selecting grandchildren. It's only selecting children.
I have a question for you.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of the div arrow p,
Yeah.
would that have the same effect? Like you put div first child. It's like as any of child and last child.
Right. Let's try that out. So we say this is what you are referring to, right?
That's correct.
And then we say we want a padding of 20. So
No, it doesn't, because now the first child becomes the.
should we try to see what's happening?
Yeah, that's an interesting one.
Mm-hmm. Can anyone explain what's happening right now? You can see that something has gotten the paragraph, right? Or sorry, the padding. But what is it that has gotten the padding? Is it the P? No, it's not the P. Is it the anchor? No. Well, it is. You say that when you use the selector without a space.
It div stuff, right?
Exactly. So we're saying that if the div is a first child, then the div should get the padding, right? So because this div is the first child, within its parent. What does it mean that it's a first child? It means that if we inspect the div's parent, which is in this case the body, and then go down, then it has only one children, a div, and because it's a first child, this will be applied. So if you want to select the div's first child, then you should.
Then you have to have another div on top of it.
No, then you.
Because you usually use that with the unordered list. You get, the first list is the first child and the last list is the last child, and then you have n of child for all the other lists in between.
Yeah.
But I don't know if it has the same effect when you're using the divs.
Well, yeah, it doesn't matter what sort of element you're selecting, but so if you want to target the first child of the div,
Then that would be
then you would actually have to do it like this with an arrow, because if you do it without the arrow, then it's
the first child on that instance, the first child will become useless because it's not really necessary.
No. Then it's actually going to target every paragraph which is a first child within the div, and this paragraph is also a first child. It's just not the first child of the div; it's the first child of the anchor. Yeah. So what you normally would do is just select the paragraph like that if you want the div child to do it. But I mean, if you had another paragraph after the anchor, then yeah, what would happen then? So let's say, I know this is very abstract, and I'm sorry about that. So let's say we have 3 paragraphs, right, within the div, but one of them is inside an anchor. And then we have this styling.
Selecting 2.
So are we, this is a bit hard to see, maybe we could do, instead of, maybe we can do just a bigger padding so we can see the difference. So you see that the 3rd paragraph is also targeted. And why is that?
Because it's child.
Yeah, because it's also a direct child of the div, even though it is under something that it isn't.
Yeah.
So it doesn't matter like where it is. If it's a direct child, then it will get selected. Yeah? Okie dokes.
So this very fast question. If
Yeah.
you say here the B first child, which ones will be taken?
So if you say what?
B first child.
B?
Yeah.
P.
P.
Yeah, sorry. P first child.
Yeah, it will target the first one.
Yeah. And then we say background blue. Then it will take all paragraphs that are a first child. It doesn't matter. So for example, the first will get targeted because it's the first child of the div. The second one will get targeted because it's the first child of the anchor.
So if I add before P,
Yeah.
div to be work for the first one.
Yeah. And it will still get targeted because this one is a it is still inside the div. But if you then you would have to write it with an arrow if it has to be a direct child of the div, right? So if you don't want to target the paragraph that's inside the anchor, then you would have to write it with the arrow. Yeah. Okay. Great. Yeah, this is something that you just need to practice over and over to get it under your skin. All right, attribute selectors. This is something you don't use as often, but it's good to know. Attributes are always in the block. What are they called? Square brackets. Thank you. And then you don't. It's not always type. It can be anything. So it can be. For example, an input type. So that means that if you have an input with the type text, with the placeholder name, for example. So if we have that input and let's say we have another one which is number and it's, for example, age, and then we only want to target the one with the number, then how would we select it?
Input,
Yeah,
bracket,
yeah,
type, text, number.
yeah. And I can't remember if it's, yeah, it is inside those, okay. Yeah, and then this should be heading 20. Yeah, so we would select it that way. But this, I mean, it's really flexible. You can use it for even the placeholder actually, because that's also an attribute. So whatever attribute you have on whatever HTML element, you can use it for it. So if, for example, if you have an ID, Krista, then I could actually even do this and it's gonna work. So it is whatever HTML attribute you have.
But you can use direct to use the ID. You can like hash.
Yeah, good catch. So there are some HTML attributes that are used for styling so often that they have a shorthand in CSS. So basically the hash for IDs is a shorthand. The dot for classes is a shorthand. And for the attributes that aren't used as often, there we can use the attribute selector. Yeah? Goody. And then there's the universal selector. Do you know that one? The star.
Yeah.
Yeah, so basically if we say star, then it's going to target everything on our page. It's going to target the HTML, the body, the input, and the other input currently.
But the same like HTML, you can say.
No, not the same as HTML, because that's probably a good way of showing it with that one. So you see that if I debug this, so now I said everything should have a padding of 20, right? So if I look at the HTML, it has padding 20. If I look at the body, it has padding 20. If I look at the input, it has padding 20. If I look at the other one, it has padding. Everything will have padding 20 on my page. If instead I write HTML padding 20, then you see it is only the HTML that has the padding 20. It's over there, right? Not the body, not the input. So the universal selector, which is the star, or asterisk, sorry, asterisks. I always think of the French comics, you know, asterisks and obelix.
Oh, the character names. It's the Viking asterisk.
Yeah, I think it's French, but I'm not
I think
sure.
it's French.
Anyway, the small guy with the horns on his, that's the universal selector, and you should normally avoid it. There was actually just a use case for it in our previous example.
Unless you're doing a reset.
What do you say?
Unless you're doing a reset.
Yeah, that's I will get back to that. But for example, I think it was. So this could have been used before, right, for targeting all the paragraphs in something. Then it could be, or actually, if we want to select all the direct children of the div. I think that was maybe what you were referring to, because the anchor here is an inline element. It doesn't work, but if the anchor is a block, then it will get the padding. Yeah, so sorry, yeah, do you know what I mean? So all the direct children of the div should have a padding 20. The anchor was not receiving it before because it was an inline element, and inline elements and paddings don't match or don't merge well. So if the direct child of the div is a block element which can get a padding, then it will target all of the direct children. What you can use the universal selector for is, for example, the box sizing. Do you guys know the box sizing?
That was something. There was a guy from Google that he came up with this
Yeah.
this setting to reset the box the
Yeah.
box display to avoid all the
Yeah.
nightmare of margins and paddings. And
Yeah, he's
that's him.
yeah, his name is Paul Irish,
Yeah.
and so you know the box sizing, what the default property is in browsers. So if I, for example, look at this page right now, and if I look at the computed styles, and if I look at the box sizing, if I can find it, then you see it's content box, and that's the default one on everything. And with the previous class we have talked about this before. This is sort of something that you do as a reset. I do it on all my projects. I apply it to the HTML. I say the box sizing should be border box instead, and then I use the universal selector, which should select everything and everything, all the before elements of everything and all the after elements of everything. And if you don't know those yet, it's okay. That's something that's mainly used for like if you want to transition things, like hover effects and stuff like that. It's not that important. We say that all of these should inherit it, and because the HTML is the first and the highest element on your web page, it will inherit it from the HTML element. So they will all get border box, or sorry, box sizing border box. So what is the difference? What does it mean if we don't have this? Do you know?
Here's the default.
Yeah, but what does it mean if you say content box instead of border box? Okay, so
It's like the box will be grow with the contents. You say content box.
yeah, so yeah,
The box will be grow. Like if you write more, the box will be bigger.
yeah, yes. So I'm trying to think of a good example how to show it. I think I have one. So let's say we have a main, right? And our main contains two divs. And both divs have a background red, and they have a outline 1 pixel solid blue, just so we can see them. And they also have a height of 300 and a width of 50%. Okay, because they are both block level elements, they get displayed under each other. So we can try to float them. How do I even float? I have not done it in such a long time. Yeah, so if I float them, they will get displayed next to each other, right? Now I have commented this out. So their box sizing is content box. So let's say that we have some text in here, right? Always the same. So we have some text in here, and let's say that they have some margin by default. We'll set their margin to 0. So you see that this is quite ugly. We would like both of them to have some padding. So let's say that we want our divs to get some padding. So if we say padding 20, then you can see that now they have some nice padding around, both of them. But what happened our design is messed up. Why?
Because it's more than 50 width now, more than 100. So they jumped down.
Yeah, bingo. So the difference between box sizing, border box, and content box is that it will calculate the width 50% either inclusive or exclusive of padding. And yeah, padding, because border box means that everything within the border. So margin will still be outside. So this means that now our divs have a width of 50% plus 20 and 20. So they are too wide, right? So if we say that to prove it, if we make a calc, I don't know if you have worked with calcs before, but so if I say that their width should be 50% minus the padding on the two sides, which is 20, 20, so 40 altogether, then they will fit. But this is super irritating that I need to calculate paddings all the time, right? So what we can do to avoid this is we can set the box sizing to border box, because now the width, the 50% width, will be calculated inclusive of the padding, right? So I can write a padding of 200 if I want to. It will still be a part of this 50%. Yeah? Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Do you understand why it's super nice to have this reset in your website?
Yeah.
This is something you will put in the top of your styles together with normalize or reset or whatever. Do you, by the way, know what normalize and reset is when I mention those? Yeah? Some of you? Okay. So I can show you super quickly. Normalize Css. There's something that you don't want to write yourself, so you copy paste it. So if I inspect the file, it's basically saying this is normalize. So it's saying that the margin should have the body should have margin 0. The main should display block. A lot of things that basically tell all the different browsers that these elements should have this default styling. And you use normalize because different browsers, so Firefox and Chrome and Internet Explorer, they have different default styles. So they will maybe apply a font size 90% to your buttons or something. So if you don't declare those on your button, then they will look different in different browsers. And that's something that you probably want to avoid, or if not you, but your designer want to avoid. So to fix this, to not to have to write button font size 100% in every project of yours, you just take this normalizer and then you can override those with your custom styles. The other one,
But it's crazy it should be necessary these days.
yeah, well, I guess it's because browsers are not owned by the same company, so they have the liberty to do as whatever they want as the default. But yeah, it is kind of
Plus, there's
strange.
20 devices right now.
Yeah. Yeah, and then the other one, the reset
They all
Css.
fight to be the coolest, but
Yeah.
in the end they all look the same.
We wish that they looked the same.
Yeah, well, it would make it easier for us, yes.
Yeah, but I mean, it's fine. Now we have a job for a long time.
Yeah. Good idea.
Yeah, maybe that's why they did it. So we
Yeah.
have a job. So the other one, which is basically almost the same as a normalize, this is the reset. It's just a more aggressive one. So this basically sets margin 0, padding 0, line height 1, blah 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 to everything. So this will give you less styling as normalize. This will allow you to define the line height on everything and on all your headings and whatever yourself. So
Make you start from scratch.
yeah, exactly. So this removes our styling, normalizes all default styling on the browsers. It will still give you some default.
This one gives you like a blank canvas. pretty much.
Exactly. Yeah, and then if you use normalize, your paragraphs will still have some margin by default. Reset will remove it, right? So that's.
Which is better, using this or just adding the variables?
I will answer you with the answer that every developer answers to every question. It depends.
It depends.
It depends on who you are. It depends on what you like to do, and it depends on your designer. If your designer doesn't care, then normalize will be perfect for you because it gives you something to work with. If you want to define everything yourself, then you want reset, because then you don't need to override normalize. Then you can just, as you said, start with a blank canvas.
I think also there's another thing that I was thinking about when you use reset. It's sort of like you have in the back of your mind that you have anything that you want to restyle. For the first, you don't have to look it up, what is the default is, or finish with settings.
Yeah.
So you know it's 0. And then you start from 0 with every single element.
Yeah.
It gives you actually more control of what you do.
Yeah, it does, but it also gives you more work, right? If you are a developer who works on their own and you are maybe building your CV site and you want to do as little as possible, then you will probably go with normalize.
Yeah, this is overkill for that.
Yeah. So, all right.
What?
That was a pretty big.
I do have one selector that I just looked it up the other day, but I can't remember. Root.
Root.
Yeah, the root selector.
The root selector.
What is it that it does actually? I can't remember.
So the root selector. That's I guess that will match the root element, which is normally the HTML element. But you use the root selector, for example, when you are defining HTML variables. I don't know if you've heard of those. No, not HTML. CSS variables.
Oh yeah.
Which are they're not called variables, they're called custom properties. So CSS variables, they basically allow you to use variables in CSS without having to use something like Css, where you need to compile your CSS. So like if you write Css, which you can do on CodePen, by the way. Right now, right here, I'm actually writing Css. So this means that for example, if I define a variable background, which should be tomato, and then I say that I want my background variable to be used, then you see, I don't know if you can see it was a bad example. So this way I can use variables, right? And it's nice because I can define all my settings in the top of my CSS, and then I can customize it super easily without having to go into every single line of my CSS. But this is not CSS. This is SCSS or Css, and browsers cannot read it. So we need to compile it into CSS. And on CodePen, you can actually see the compiled CSS, which will be this. It will compile into regular CSS. So you see that there are no variables here. It will compile them and use, like for example, if I go back to the uncompiled version again, and I want to use this on the paragraph as well, and I have some other stuff. And if I now look at the compiled version, then you see that the background blue is there both times. But yeah, so you need to do this yourself for the browsers to be able to read it. So in the new version of CSS, or in newer CSS, we are allowed to use CSS variables, which browsers are able to read. And it has a really ugly syntax in my view. And what you need to do there is you declare the variables, not like in Css. So if we go back to the uncompiled version, and we set this back to tomato. So when you use Css, then you don't need to wrap your variables into a specific selector like that. You don't need to do that at all. You can actually do that. So you can create local variables in that way. So for example, if I say that the background is actually blue, then that will overwrite it within the div. But if I say that the padding should have the background of the background variable, then it will not take the blue one, which is defined locally, but it will take it from the global definition outside of the selector. I don't know if you understand this. This is like JavaScript scoping, sort of, right? This is encapsulated within the div block, so the paragraph is ignoring it, right? So that's how Css variables work. You don't need to define them within a container, but you do need to define CSS variables. So in that case, you would select them with the root selector, where you would say that the background, for example, we could just call it background color is brown, and then you can use it like background var, and then what's it called, bg color, and then you see it overrides it. Again, it's a bad example. They look similar, the two, but yeah, so it has overwritten it. And actually, and sorry, if you look at the compiled version, then you see that the Css variable has disappeared, but the CSS variable is still there. And that's because browsers understand this. They don't need to compile it. So some people say that CSS variables are the future of variables currently out there. It is also kind of smart to, if you have Css installed on your project, you can use a mix of the two. And if you write a Css variable first, which will be compiled to CSS, and then you write a CSS variable which will not be compiled, and then you look at it in a browser that doesn't understand CSS variables, then it will ignore the second declaration. So it will understand what it understands, but it will ignore what it doesn't understand. So it will default back or fall back to the thing that it understands.
I have a tough question.
Yeah.
What if you use the variable from other files? For example, if you have two CSS files and one variable defined in the first one, can you use it in another file?
Yeah, so if you have maybe a main CSS file or a style CSS file, which is importing some other files, then as far as I know, you can use them in different files. So if you are importing them into each other.
Like, for example, I built like CSS files with my own variable, how I imagine like colors and background, so it'll be more easy. And I include that to HTML, uploaded there.
Yeah.
And then I create the main style, and I start to use that variable.
Yeah.
It will work.
It will work if you do it in a certain way. I can try to show it to you kind of quickly because we don't have.
You're talking about importing a CSS file into another CSS file.
Like if you have variable, like you define in that, like you said, like CSS1, for example, this file, you define the background bigger white, and you create CSS2 file, the other one. Can you use the same variable from the first one and same HTML?
You would have to import the first CSS file either on the HTML or import the CSS.
Yeah, I'm saying the same HTML. Same HTML.
Yeah, you should be able to use it. But I think you can. I think you do it both ways. You can actually list them in in the HTML head, or you can actually import just like you import when you import Google Fonts on CSS, right? You can import Google Fonts on CSS. You would import a second CSS file into.
Okay, so what you can do, let's say that I have this file called vars.css, which contains all my variables. So here I would say that I would wrap them into this root selector, and I would say the background color has to be green. And then in here I would say import vars CSS. I can't remember how you do this actually. I'm actually not sure if you can do it in clean CSS. Import CSS to another CSS. Include it's called, yeah, of course. So yeah, no, it is import. Okay. So
You just need a
local. Yeah. So I think you can do this. So let's say that.
You also need the semicolon at the end.
Okay, so let's say that I want my main to have the background of this other thing, that one, right? So in my index, I'm importing the main CSS, right? In my main CSS, I'm importing the vars CSS. In the vars CSS, I'm defining the background color, and then in the main CSS, I'm using that background color where I'm targeting the main, which is in the HTML file. So if this works, right, then in theory, the main, well, maybe we should also give it some height.
Ready.
Actually, we don't need to add. Okay. So if I open this in Chrome, maybe I can just do this. Yeah, so you see that the main has the background color, and it's 3 different files. So you can do it that way. And then if you have multiple CSS files, which is, I don't know, if you have one for each component, for example, if you have header.css, where you have all your CSS files that is to do with the header, then you would just import this variables file into each of those CSS files. And then you have access to the same variables in multiple files. Do you know what I mean?
yes.
Yeah. So you would do it that way. I can zip this and upload it to Slack. So you have this super simple example of how to import variables into the files. Okay, so that was a really big sidetrack. Let's try to get back to. Otherwise, unless you guys, if you have more questions. Oh, okay. But I mean, it's good sidetracks, right? Because they would be covered in the slides anyway, and this is a more organic way of understanding stuff. So I think it's fine. So yes, that's a boring one. What about this one? So yeah, what it says is basically, if you have multiple CSS or HTML elements which have the same class, then you can target multiple things with the same CSS. That's clear, right? Yeah, should we take an example, or it is clear?
It is clear.
Great.
Restore.
Examples are good. No. Just go.
You'll probably get lynched, but now we're doing it. So, okay, it will take 1 second. So let's say we have this.
It's pure democracy here.
Yes.
It's not Trump administration.
No, just one vote, and we'll go right for it. So if we say that this background, I'm just gonna remove this. So if we say that my div should have the background color, and then so we remove that, right? The div doesn't have any background color anymore. I select the class myDiv, which is present on multiple HTML elements, it will get applied to both. So one line of CSS or one CSS selector can target multiple things on the website. That's pretty much what this means. We can also use one CSS file in multiple HTML files. That's also clear, right? So if we have indexed HTML, if we have another file called about.html, and if I just copy paste all of this, and we say this is index and this is about, then and if I open the index HTML and then in a new tab open the about HTML, then you see, well, I don't know if you see, it says about there, right? It says index there, so it's two different files and they're using the same CSS file. That's also super useful because that means that you can style your different pages with on the same website in a consequent way, right? So that it follows the same style guide, right? So that's really useful.
With 3 homework, there are like 4 pages.
Yeah. Yeah, then you would probably have a main CSS which you import in multiple files. Yeah, order doesn't matter in HTML. So if you have a button red and the red button, button will not be overriding red there, and red will not be overriding button there. What matters is the order in CSS, right? So if in CSS, so if we just take this, so if we have, actually, I'm gonna do this, button red, and this is not a button, I know, but it doesn't matter. We say red button. So we have these two, and we say button should have a height 10, and red should have a height 20. And we just give divs a background, if I can spell background, red. Then, and that's very difficult to see, and then an outline of, by the way, do you know what the difference between border and outline is?
No, I haven't seen that one before.
No? So the difference between border and outline is that border will affect the width. So it is a part of your a part of the DOM, I think it's called, and the outline is sort of on top of it. So it will not affect the, if you say width 50%, then outline will not affect it. So
outline sits on top of the box model.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. It's sort of like in Photoshop if you have another layer, right? It will have nothing to do with the layer underneath, and it's that way. It's really good for testing.
It's like a Z index 0. That one. The outline.
Yeah.
What if you do a Z index -10 on? I know, then it affects only the div, not the outline.
Let's not mix Z index into it, because Z index will affect the whole div. So outline it's just it's like an angel hovering over, right? And it's normally used for testing. Sometimes it's used for button outlines when you are tabbing through things, right? Not in there, but on your website, if you're tabbing through a form, for example. When you like know which one is active, that's an outline. Yeah. So you see that button comes first and red comes first on the other div, but both divs will have a height of 200 because in the CSS red is the one that comes latest.
So if you switch,
So if I switch the two, then they will have a height of 100 because button is the latest. Is that clear?
Yeah.
Yeah? Great.
Just a small question.
Hmm?
If you want to choose the class or the class like bottom red, for example.
Yeah?
If you make a mistake, if you don't have the other div, you have just the first one, bottom red,
Yeah?
button red.
Yeah?
If you change it, you said red buttons will not take it, right? The order.
Doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter.
So if I
They
say
similar.
red button on both,
No. If you don't have the other, if you delete the other
Yeah,
one,
if
the next
there's-
second one.
if I delete that one,
No, the second if
this.
it's not there.
I don't understand. Sorry, say it again.
Yeah, if it's not there, well, the arrangement of the class button and red
So if that's not there,
Yeah.
it will not
doesn't
affect it.
matter.
It doesn't matter because the only thing that matters is that in our CSS buttons styling is the latest,
No,
so it will override the red.
You know, but one time you say if you want to make specific choosing for the class,
Mhm.
that's why you choose two names for the class, for example. And if you don't have the other div and you have like instead you create like bottom red, you make it opposite red button. This will be effect to select.
So what you're saying is that if you have a button and then if you have a button primary, is that what you mean?
No.
The button and the red are two different classes.
Yes.
It's not the name of the class itself. So
Okay.
button red, it's not the name, but there's a class button and there's a red.
Yeah, exactly. That's
red
what I
class.
mean. Like if you mix it, like for example,
It doesn't matter.
it doesn't matter.
It does, over here you can have button red, red button, button red, red button, but it doesn't matter how you organize them here.
Yeah.
What matters is how you organize them here,
Okay.
because the way it's structured here now, a button it has the highest hierarchy. So the browser will read this one and ignore this one. This one will override whatever is in here. If you put that this one is 200, this is 100, so this 100 is overriding the red because it's the latest one.
What about if I give red a padding? What will happen? Will that
Then-
count or?
No, then it will take it because button doesn't have a padding.
So then red and this one is messed up now because so you see both will get the padding because button is not overriding the padding, it's only overriding the height. So it's only those exact properties if they have the same specificity, and they do, if there is a new value for the height, then it will look at that instead of the other one, it will override it. But because we're not overriding the padding, it will still count.
That clear now?
Yes. Thanks.
Cool. We're not gonna take a break now, but we will take a break half past because that's where we don't need to go out of the meeting room. Okay? Is that fine with you?
Yeah.
Can you? Okay. Sorry if it's boring. I know it's theory.
oh, it's warm.
So
Yeah, super warm. We can go out now if you want to. We just
No,
don't
it's
have a
fine.
projector.
That's gonna take longer.
Okay.
But
Yeah.
I have to leave in the 6:15
Yeah.
because I have to go to Aarhus
Yeah.
and I need to leave that time.
That's fine. That's totally fine. Am I recording? Yeah. Good. All right.
And would you please also share those PowerPoint, the CSS and HTML
Yeah,
for last week?
Sure. I
Thank
will.
you.
No worries. Okay.
I put it on Slack. We were talking earlier on the first child, last child, enough child.
Mm-hmm.
There's a section on the CSS tricks where you can actually see how the nth of child works. They have formulas and all that, so you can actually mess up the formulas
Okay.
and see what happens to it.
Oh, great. Thank you.
Okay, do you guys know the difference between the adjacent sibling and the general sibling selector? So the one with the wave and the one with the plus sign? Yeah? I mean, it's also, it's very petty stuff. It is, I don't even know when you would use it.
Adjacent is they're next to each other, right?
Yeah, so let's say that you have a, where would you use this? So let's say we have a main which has a heading and then it has a paragraph. I guess that would make sense. And then it has another paragraph because this is an article and it has multiple paragraphs. So let's say that I want the paragraph right after the heading to be a bit bigger, right? Because it's the intro paragraph. Then I would say that the headings, what's it called? Next sibling, but only the next sibling, right? So it's called the adjacent sibling. It has to be, I can't remember which one it was. Yeah, right. So it has to be font size 120%. Then this would work, right? So I'll just write another paragraph. So you see there are multiple paragraphs, but it's only the first one it's only the first one that's selected, and it's because the plus sign means that it's the next sibling, so this one, right? And if I write general sibling selector, then it's going to select all the siblings of the H1. Does anyone want to make a lucky guess whether it's going to select the paragraph that is before the heading?
You shouldn't.
No,
No, you shouldn't
because
because
it's not sibling.
It is a sibling, but it is only general
It's not
siblings
part of the-
after. It is. You see, they're all siblings, right? And they are all within the article, but it's before the heading. So this wave thingy, the general sibling, it's only after. So if
the name for the thread is a tilde.
a tilde, okay. I like wave better, to be honest, but I will use tilde. I have heard it
I
before.
know because we have it in my language.
Yeah, tilde.
A tilde.
Or a tilde. Okay, so this is irritating. I want to select all the paragraphs, also the one before the heading. What would I do then?
Then you do an article.
Just try to repeat.
Yeah,
You could do that too.
yeah. So yeah, but let's say,
How about H1?
well, look. So let's say I have a paragraph, maybe inside an aside. So if I don't want to select that one, right? The aside has a background of red, just so we can see it. So I don't want to select that paragraph, the one inside the aside. I only want to select all the paragraphs inside the article. Then I could use the direct child selector, right? That could work. I could also use this one if I want to select any paragraph anywhere inside the article. So if I have a div here and I also want to select that one, then this one would be fine. So can you guess if this paragraph, I'm going to call this special paragraph, or maybe nested is better. So if can you guess what would happen if instead of this selector, I'm just gonna comment it out so I don't blow the surprise. So if I say was it the general sibling we talked about? I think so. So do you think that the nested paragraph will get a font size of 120? or will it not? Because I'm not selecting that paragraph with the general sibling selector. I'm selecting all the other ones. Do you think I will select this one or not?
No,
I don't think
it's
so.
not sibling.
I don't think so.
Yeah, it's not a sibling.
No,
What is it?
child.
The child of the div.
Yeah. So it's a nephew.
A cousin that we see every 10 years.
Yeah.
It's a grandchild of article.
Yeah. What am I not doing right here? Article and P. Is it not working or?
Just with 200% fonts and see what happens.
Because P is not a sibling of article.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I'm totally messing it up. It's not a sibling of the article. You're right. It is.
It's our grandchild.
It's a grandchild of the article.
Yeah, it was the heading, right?
Mm.
So yeah, it was the general sibling of the heading of it now.
But it still, it still should work for the first paragraph though.
No,
The
because
first paragraph
that's
is outside the first paragraph is outside the heading.
no. Well, yeah, but it's inside the article, so it's not a sibling; it's a child.
But you had the article before.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. It's the paragraph. This paragraph, the first paragraph, right? It's the first child of the article.
Yeah.
Not the first sibling after the article.
Ah, okay.
So that was a super trick question. But yeah, the answer is the nested paragraph will not get styled because it's not a sibling. It is a distant family member. Yeah. All right. Okay. Have you worked with pseudo classes?
Yeah.
Hover.
Yeah. So you know what hover is used for? I guess that's the most important one. So if we say we have this anchor, and we say this anchor should have a background of red, yeah, but when we hover it, then it should have a background of blue. So that will happen when we hover over anywhere on the link, then it will turn blue. So that's pretty useful.
It's also very useful for styling forms, but that's another story.
Yeah. There is also a link, which is basically when it's unclicked. Or is it? Yeah. Then there is visited, which is after it's been clicked.
And you can use the same page, for example.
Yeah. Then there is active, which is when it's being clicked. That's not a very useful one. Yeah, I don't think there's other ones. No, it's those ones. Yeah. Do you know the other pseudo classes?
Before, after.
Yeah, but those are not pseudo classes. Those are pseudo elements.
Transform.
I don't know. Transform. Well, okay. We take one thing at a time. So the other pseudo classes are, for example, first child that we have talked about before. That's also a first child, or that's also a pseudo class. So now we are selecting all the anchors that are first children, and this one is a first child. So it will be selected. Also, if I make a div where there is an anchor inside, that will also be blue because it's also a first child. Then there is a last child. You see that this first link, it's not, I'm just gonna wrap it inside something so it looks less weird. So you see we have two children within the main, we have an anchor and a div. And then if we say that I want to select all the anchors that are last children, it will select this one because, well, it's the only child, so it's also the last child. This one has a div after it, so this will not be targeted. Then what? Yeah, we have last of type and first of type. Do you know what the difference between first of type and first child is?
Like the first B, for example, in one paragraph. let's
Yeah.
say.
So if we say yeah, so if we say that first of type, then
A and
both will be selected because they are, this one is the first of its type. It's the first anchor that there is. So if I made another anchor here, that would be red because that's not the first of its type. This one is the first of its type within the parent, which is the main. And this anchor, the another link over there, that's also turning blue because it's the first of its type within its parent, which is the div, right? If we had a heading, for example, then this link would still be turning blue because even though it's not the first child, it's the first of its type. So if we say the first child should be blue, then the link is not turning blue anymore because it's not the first child, but
Sorry
it's
for interrupt. I have to leave.
all right.
Bye everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye bye. Thanks for today.
But shouldn't the heading should be? No, yeah, okay, the A. Sorry.
So do you see the difference if it's a first of its type but not the first child? Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, and it's the same with the last of type and last child. It's the same.
But it's not within all the HTML or just like in specific.
It's within the parent container
Within
always.
like if you say the first of type, like A,
Yeah.
the first of type. You
Yeah.
have like main, you have A, for example, and you have article, you also have A.
Yeah.
So it will take the both A.
Can you help me create that example?
For example, you have the main now.
Mm-hmm.
And can you create something out of the main?
Outside
like
of the main?
article.
Yeah.
And you write A also here.
Yeah.
Something
Yeah.
should be also,
Be targeted.
it's target also.
So this is also a first of its type within the parent container.
If you put one more link
Yeah.
in the article, it will turn red.
Mm.
Yeah, so first of type will always look at the specific anchor and it will say, if I go one level up, am I the first of my type? Yes, then I will turn blue. Then it will look at this anchor, will go up to its parent, am I the first of my type? No, I will not turn blue. And then it will do the same here, right? Am I the first of my type within the main, which is my parent? Yes, I will turn blue. Am I the first of my type? No.
So it's the first of type in sibling.
The first of type,
In sibling way.
yes.
You're comparing by sibling, not by like fathers or like.
No. It will look at all the siblings. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
It's family lessons here.
Yeah, it is. It really is. It really is. But I mean, it's better because then you can relate to it, right?
Yeah, I'll be better for my family now.
Yeah. That's good. And relate to it, by the way, was a pun. I don't know if you got it. Sorry. Right. And then there are pseudo elements, which are, for example, like before and after elements. Have you worked with those?
You just write that when the star selector.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. We
when you
wrote.
set the box.
yeah.
When
Yeah.
you-
That's true. So
For the element.
I will give you a very simple example of it. Let's say we have this H1 heading and we have another, yeah, it's fine. Yeah, we just run with that one. So we say that the before element of this h1 should have a content of, I know that you can do it with like dynamically, so it will find the index of it, so you can write like numbers, like this is the first heading, then this is the second, and do you know what I mean? So if you have like a, then this, the second heading would have 2 and the third heading would have 3, but now we're just gonna do it hard coded, right? So the content will basically render before the content of the element. And
Automatically.
what do you say?
Automatically.
Yeah, and this, if I write after, then it will get rendered after the content. What you can do with this is sometimes you use it like this, like content, but mostly you don't. Mostly you use it for, well, let's say, for example, I'm trying to come up with a simple example. So let's say that I have this div, and I have a paragraph inside, and then the div has a background of papaya whip, and it also has a padding of 20, just to make it a bit nicer. And then let's say that I want this div to have a before element, but I don't want it to have any textual content. I still need to declare it. Then I would say it's just an empty string. And then I have to, if I want to position it, then I need to say it's display block. And then I would, this is what I normally use it for. So for example, I want it to have an overlay. I want it to be a bit dimmed, this div, right? So what I would do is I would give it a position absolute and a width of 100%. This seems like super fast right now what I'm typing, but I have typed it approximately 10,000 times. That's how often I use it. That's why I am so quick at it. So the important points here is that the div, which will be the one that contains the before or after element, in this case it doesn't matter which one it is, it has to be position relative, because the before element will be position absolute, and for it to be relative to its parent, its parent needs to have a position other than the default one, which is static.
Mm-hmm.
And positioning we'll cover next time, but this is just an intro to it. So what I'm doing here, basically, if I give it a background red, then now I have created my before element and made it fill in the exact size of the div, right? So I'm saying that this should be position absolute with top left 0, so it should start up here in that corner, and it should have a width and height of 100%, and that is relative to its parent, and that's why it has to be position absolute, because then it brings it out of the DOM just like the outline. Basically, it will be on top of stuff, and it's not gonna affect. Like for example, if I put something,
Another div there.
yeah, it's kind of difficult to show it, but yeah, I could write another div here. It will, and it should not be a div. It should be a paragraph, so that it doesn't inherit the styles. It will not affect anything else. Yeah. Anyway, we'll explain that next time. But yeah, so what I want to do here is I want to get this to be maybe a gray of 10%. So what I want here is that when I hover my div, so let's say hover, then I want, and this is kind of hard not being able to use Css because I'm normally nesting things into each other, but I'm not going to do that now. So if I say that when the div is hovered, its before element should have display none. So that means that I'm gonna say it like this. So I'm sure you have seen those images and some text under each other where the image is sort of dimmed, and when you hover it, then it lights up. So that's how it's done. Then I can apply it, so sort of a nice transition. Actually, instead of display none, I'm just gonna say opacity 0, which is a much better property to transition. So if I just say opacity 0.0 second and ease, we'll also talk about this later on. Then when I hover, then you see that it lights up super nicely. So that's how those dimmed images that light up, that's how it's done. So that's what a before and after element is normally used for. And I can post this on Slack as well, so you can you can dig deeper. And I know this is but I know this is difficult, but it's just that you understand how it's done on other websites when you inspect it a little easier is a help for you. I'm not asking you to be able to write this right now. I'm just saying that if you understand it a bit better than 10 minutes ago, that's good.
That works. That works.
All right. Cool. Let's take a break. Yeah?
Then,
Like a 5-minute break, and then we'll go
okay, one last
out
question.
there. Yeah?
Before the break or something. Now, so far, I still get confused, or I still don't really understand the meaning or the differences between block, inline block, and flex. So it creates a lot of problems for me to position the stuff that I need to.
Yeah.
So is there a way to differentiate between them? Like you mentioned before that some of the elements are blocked by nature or are whatever other stuff. How do I know that? Okay, for example, which ones are blocks? The images are inline block.
So how the way normally the way you know that is by exactly.
Okay, so there is no way.
There are only limited elements that are inline. Just remember them. Mostly it's images and anchor. The rest are blocked.
Yeah.
If you want to inline block, you just specify. But they are really blocked.
But
it means that they go on stack of each other.
But the way to know it is if you look at the inspect tool, and then you look at display, then it will show that it's a block element. But yeah, it's right. Most of them are block.
Yeah.
It's image, span, and anchor that are inline. Most other stuff are block. And there are no elements that are by nature display flex or inline flex or other stuff. They are all or inline block. They are all block or inline. And then there's one exception, which is the table, which is display table. But you should not worry about it. You should not use tables unless you're doing email.
Yeah.
And I hope really that you don't need to do email because it's horrible.
Okay, well, that works.
But if you want to understand flex, I posted a link on Slack. to. It's a free
Yeah, I'll
course.
check it out.
Yeah.
It's a
I
free
have
course.
and
Yeah.
they sent us before, like we had this game, the front
Yeah.
thing and stuff.
Yeah, the
like
front.
that.
Yeah, but this one the guy actually
the
explains
zombies?
because he.
The zombies. The zombies I haven't even managed to open.
The zombies are, it's actually, that's the best one, I think.
Yeah.
They
You
explain
finished
it
the
so
frog
well.
or still don't understand?
No, I haven't
Like
finished
me.
the product. You know, I have this page open for like almost 2 months now.